Hello and welcome to the Deep Down NBA podcast. My name's Sean and joining me as always is the one and only Dante Boffimus. Welcome, man. How are we?
I'm good. I need to do some stretching for this one after a week hiatus. Make sure that the voice box is all stretched out and ready to go.
Okay. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
of course, because I'm a pro's pro. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I've actually got a basketball story to start off the pod.
What a story to start off the pod?
You wouldn't hear about it. So, I played basketball last night, and your natural question is, but Sean, you play on Mondays. What's this Wednesday team?
That is exactly what I was going to ask you.
So, my new Wednesday team is with my friend Ellie, and it's mixed basketball. And I've never played mixed basketball in Richmond. Never played mixed basketball before. So, I start the game. Win tip-off.
Big man team.
Probably a bit of an unfair jump, but that's all right.
How tall was she?
No, it was a he, and he was quite small. And then I'm just playing like normal. My friend Ellie, who's like the one who got me into the team, was just like, "Oh yeah, Sean, you'll be fine. Like, you know, just play like normal basketball and stuff." And I'm like, "Are there any rules with like restrictions? Have you played mixed basketball before?"
I have played mixed basketball.
So I'm like, "Are there any rules with restrictions?" And then 2 minutes later, she's like, "Oh yeah, you can't go in the key." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Okay." Or she said something. She worded it where she was like, "Oh, you're allowed in the key in the first half," and I'm like, "Yeah, I fucking hope so." Like, I don't do much else outside of the key, Ellie. And then I'm sitting there, high post operator, got this massive view, right? Obviously above a small person. Like, man, there's cuts to be made for days, and there's only two dudes on the court, me and this guy called Ben. So I'm like, Ellie, fill the lane, big brother. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, she can finish with the best of them. And then she's like, "Oh yeah, sure." And 3 minutes into the game, she's like, "I can't go in the key." I'm like, I would have loved to know that before.
Wait, why can't she go in the key?
Because chicks can't go in the key. So at the start, is this different to yours?
But if guys can't go in the key and chicks can't go in the key, who can go in the key?
So I got it wrong. The first half, guys were allowed in, not chicks, and then it flipped at halftime.
Okay.
But yeah, I just thought crazy dynamic. Because then at the start, I thought it was just on offense, and then on defense, I'm like, box out, man. She goes, no, it's defense as well. And I'm like, far out. Wish I'd known this 3 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And then in the second half, there was like a steal running down. Not me, like this guy Ben. So obviously he's not allowed in the key in the second half. He's running down, chasing down this chick who's like got the ball on the fast break. And then I'm just thinking, he's not going to be able to go all the way, right? And then she just sprinted into the key and then slowed down because he's not allowed into the key. I'm like, this is such a weird dynamic. Like, what do you do? And then all of a sudden, the Daryl Morey
There's a
in
bit
my
of Chris
head,
Paul about that move, sprinting in front of your opponent and then slowing down.
all of a sudden, the Daryl Morey in me was like, well, surely Ben just walks right into the key and gets a whistle blown against him because otherwise that's a free layup. That's free 2 points. You may as well just take it from the side out and wait for the defense to catch up. So I brought that up at the next timeout, and it might have been a little bit too much discussion for Wednesday's social sport when this team is just flunked.
It's also grossly against the spirit of the game.
But, you know, Kevin Shady rushed behind, so it's in a similar vein. But no, we didn't implement that. And then the second team, the game after us couldn't fill the second team, so they said, "Do you guys want to play again?" And I'm like, "Fucking yeah, right."
Of course.
Like, fuck oath, play some more games. Playing the second game, we were all very tired. We've just played a whole game, and these guys were like, "Oh, do you mind if we just play normal rules?" I'm like, "Yeah, 100%, that'd be great. So we don't have to think. We can just do." Playing everything.
You ate.
Huh?
I bet you ate then.
I'm grunting for those who don't know. No, cheeky little 8 and 10, but you know who's counting. And then, like, I'm pretty exhausted, right? Like I'm not the fittest guy, and back-to-back games, 5 minutes to go in the second half. It's tired hours. And then I'm standing up there, like, I'm at the half court. We've just got a turnover, so this dude's quickly running back on the other side, and I'm just standing there, like, maybe I'll put a little hand in the cookie jar, but I'm not stressing out. He does the Jamal Murray Lonzo ball, flick the ball around me and run the other way, and everyone on his team's like, "Woo!" And I'm like, "Look at me, I'm glazed with sweat right now. There's no fucking way." He knows I just played my second game. Don't do that to me. And that is exactly how was it? Who did it to? I think Jamal did it to Lonzo. Do you remember that? When Lonzo was a Laker, and then
was it not a Trey thing?
No, Trey would have come after Jamal Murray, but Jamal Murray, like, the game was over, they're up by 5 points, and then he flicked the ball around Lonzo, and then said, "Take that L on the way out." And then Lonzo was like, "This is a rivalry," and then it turned out not to be a rivalry.
Yeah, who would have thought?
But yeah, I was just thinking to myself, like, if I had known he was going to do that, I would have just grabbed his jersey and been like, "Ha ha ha! Ha, you're not doing that to me." But I'm just bewildered, drenched in sweat, exhausted.
Did you win the game?
No, we lost. We lost both games.
Yeah,
but I don't know if you heard me. I said 8 and 10. Like, it's not right stat line. There's 9 in team if you spell it wrong.
Well, that's a very it's a very unfulfilling results-wise, but great to get the running. Good to get the pumping.
Yeah, good to get the 2 runs.
Like, I'd kill for a back-to-back game situation. You're dead by the end of it, but boy, is the fun whilst it lasts.
Yeah. Especially a back-to-back game where it is social and you don't actually care about the result.
Exactly. Yeah, the second game, being completely unburdened from the result is a great liberator in social sports.
Also, obviously not being able to stand in the key in the second half, I was like, fucking mid-range mastery, right? So I'm spotting up right in the perfect spot. Probably got fed about 5 times. It all felt amazing coming off the fingertips.
Yeah.
And none of them made it.
Yeah.
With each passing shot, I just missed more and more and more.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I went from back rim to front rim to air ball to side of the rim, and I'm like, I'll see you guys next week.
Know the signs, know when to stop.
Only a little bit over, you bloody idiot. So let's talk a little bit about news before we get into the week's topic, and I hope the hissing from the heater doesn't show up. But for those being concerned, don't be concerned. It's a natural sound for a gas heater to make.
If we do get carbon monoxide poisoning halfway through,
it'll be recorded.
Yeah, it'll be recorded.
So the biggest piece of news that happened just hours before this pod was that the Los Angeles Lakers have traded for Patrick Beverley, sending back Taylor Horton-Tucker and Stanley Johnson to the Utah Jazz.
Can I just ask you a question straight off the bat?
Yeah.
Is this a good trade for the Lakers?
Yeah. When you look at the historical precedent that Rob Pelinka didn't want to include THT in any trade for Kyle Lowry just 12 months ago, shocking. But in terms of the fact that THT hasn't played well for 12 months and you've been able to turn him to a rotation player, like you've got 2 guys who shouldn't be in a playoff rotation for one guy who, he's a player. What do you think about this trade?
I think it's a good trade in late August 2022. But right now, as the cards stand, I think it's a great trade. But it's fucking hilarious to see how they've mismanaged the THT asset. Not only not including him in the trade, but the contract that they gave him, $33 million over 3 years. Not only did he not play up to the first year of that contract this year, but even if he did, he'd be able to leave anyway because he's got a player option for his last year. So he's essentially a potential expiring contract. And I mean, for the return that you get for THT when his name had been bandied about, in the Kyle Lowry trade concretely, and then also at the end of last season, THT in a 2027 first, and all you come away from THT with is Patrick Beverley, who is at this point 34.
It's shocking he's still good, which is concerning for the future.
So he's 34. The biggest thing that I want to know, though, and this is less like NBA analysts and more like salacious gossip, he's going to be on the same team with Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, but he might not be as well.
Nah, but he probably will be, though, because, I don't doubt that Westbrook will be traded at some point, but I don't know if it's more likely that he's traded before the start of the season. Because if he was going to be traded, he would have been traded. So this could definitely, Westbrook being on the team, I think Westbrook will definitely be on the team for the start of training camp.
So
they're going to play at least preseason games together. Yeah. They're going to be locked in the gym together, both trying to get there earlier so they can say that he's the first to get there and the last to leave.
Yeah, it's 1 a.m. It's like, man, I've been here since 1 a.m. It's like,
when is this guy going to leave?
And eventually it is 24 hours and you can just cycle around and never leave. But I think, I completely understand that. If Russ was going to get traded, probably would have been by now. But I think there is also the KD/Curry element where now that we know, which we'll talk about at the KD has rescinded his trade request, now the dominoes are going to start to fall. And funny little thing is that Isaiah Thomas said, fine, can we start signing contracts now? And then the Shanghai Sharks just said, all right, sign with us. But I think, if a big trade like this was going to happen, it might have already happened, but now let's give it a week. Let's give it a week.
I'm not necessarily saying that I don't think that it'll happen. I'm just saying that there's a substantial chance that this, drags into training camp,
and that these guys are
in the facility together.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know or might have forgotten, the Patrick Beverley Westbrook beef, specifically, aside from everyone having beef with Pat Bev because he's fucking annoying, the beef comes from when, let's say like 2015, when Pat Bev was with Houston and he was in his like terrier point of attack god, like all
he's got that terrier in him.
he's got that terrier. When he was in that mode, that mindset, and Westbrook brought the ball just over halfway to call a timeout, and it was very obvious to every single person that's exactly what he was going to do. And Pat Bev dived at the ball, took out Westbrook's knee in the process. And was it a torn ACL?
Yeah, I think it was a torn ACL.
Something bad. Westbrook missed the whole year.
And it was a year that they were, a very good shout to win the whole thing. And obviously, KD spent the season following without him by his side. And like sometimes I'm guilty of watching videos and getting really furious. Like, we've talked about uncut gems and, just watching videos that make you really emotional. But whenever I watch that video, I actually, my blood boils a little bit. It is such a dog play. And obviously there's been heaps of Patrick Beverley stuff since then, but it is pretty frustrating to watch that video when you know that that's a young up-and-coming team that had already made the finals and they were just ready to, potentially make another run. Pretty fucked up. Not even a basketball player. So
no, yeah, for sure.
And it's only gotten worse since then. If you've heard them talking back and forth.
Yeah, there's been beef in the intervening years for sure. And Westbrook famously said about Pat Bev that he doesn't do anything. He just runs around and makes you think that he's good. Would you like to hear the as we love Fox Sports over here. The Murdochs and Fox News more generally. No, but Fox Sports for purely comedic value, we love here at the Deep 2. Would you like to hear, Sean, the title of an article published by Fox Sports about this very topic 3 hours ago?
Yep.
Enemies turn teammates as Lakers' $68 million dilemma trade takes twist.
Oh, man. Right.
I love these guys. They're so good. They're so good.
We should touch on the Utah side of things before we move on. Do you like this from the Jazz point of view?
Yeah, for sure. Because Pat Bev is
hasn't played a game
in no man's land in Utah. At this stage of his career, his only role is to be on a playoff team. The Lakers might not even be a playoff team, but that's beside the point. And you may as well get a look at THT. You may as well just,
I think there's a non-0% chance he becomes like a poor man's Trevor Ariza.
Yeah, for sure. He's also 21. He was also really bad this year. He was not very good. Yeah. But if the alternatives is you are going to be in a rebuild for at least the next 2 years, so paying him $11 million per year doesn't really matter at all, then okay, that's fine. Otherwise, if he's really good this year and he becomes a $15 million player and he opts out, well, you can just pay him $15 million if you want.
Yep.
And if he opts out and leaves, then you got rid of Pat Bev's contract and you got rid of THT's contract, and now you just have more room to take on bad contracts for draft picks if that's what you decide to do, which, as we'll touch on a little bit later, is a hallmark of someone like OKC. They've made bank just taking on bad contracts with first round picks attached. So I like it. I think it is a very clear, not that we needed any more signal after the Gobert trade and all of the Mitchell rumors, but it's a very clear signal of intent that this Utah team fully intends to be the worst team in the conference.
All right, let's move on to the other piece of news for the week /day. Is that the Brooklyn Nets have announced that the team and Kevin Durant have decided to, quote, move forwards with their partnership, unquote. This is coming from Brooklyn Nets PR. In a statement released by the Nets PR team with a nice little boardroom stamp on.
I fucking hated that, to be honest.
Boardroom ventures.
I actually
hate the
that.
quote.
All right. No, I hated that. So boardroom being Kevin Durant and his agent Rich Kleiman's business together. I hated. It felt like pandering. It felt like why does the player's logo need to be on the team press release?
I think just to remove any confusion that it was from both parties.
No, I hated it.
Okay, well I'll read the quote from Sean Marks that was in the press release. that says, quote, Steve Nash and I, together with Joe Tsai, Clara Wu-Tsai, met with Kevin Durant and Rich Kleiman in Los Angeles yesterday. We have agreed to move forwards with our partnership. We are focusing on basketball with one collective goal in mind, build a lasting franchise to bring a championship to Brooklyn, end quote. So Kevin Durant will play for the Brooklyn Nets next season. Sort of happy this has come to an end because the trade packages just seem to be getting worse by the day. So I'm happy that now it's like, okay, we're not going to send a bunch of peanuts for a soon-to-be 34-year-old Kevin Durant. So look, the Brooklyn Nets are still title contenders. I think if we look at their offseason and were to regrade it again, I think they've had an excellent offseason in terms of using their MLE to bring in TJ Warren, re-signing Patty Mills in what seems a little bit like an under-the-table, we'll pay you a little bit extra if you opt out and re-sign. They've obviously got someone like Seth Curry, who they got in the Ben Simmons trade. Ben Simmons recently cleared to play 3-on-3, which is like, I actually forgot he was injured. And they traded for Royce O'Neal, which just seems to be a good fit on most title contending teams. But what do you think about this whole shebang?
I think... I think that anyone in the organisation who's like, poor, like, glad that's over, kidding themselves, because, I've been banging the drum for the whole time this iteration of the Nets has been perpetually falling apart. But with characters on board, like who they've gotten themselves into bed with organisationally, like this isn't the last of the drama. This isn't the last of the whole, of this whole shebang, as you put it. Kyrie has 1 year left on his contract. So if things are going okay or going well, and the situation is this, that the Nets now have to offer Kyrie Irving an extension or like lose him to unrestricted free agency and potentially damage the collective goal to build a lasting franchise and bring a championship to Brooklyn. If that goal hinges on whether you're going to give Kyrie Irving a 4-year max or a 5-year max, that will potentially become contentious very quickly. And not only with Kyrie, but also with KD. Because if KD, is like, I'm sticking around, you have to take care of this guy. Cool. Then if you take care of him, you get KD to stick around. But then you've given Kyrie Irving a 5-year max.
Which is something they said they didn't want to do this offseason before he ended up picking up his option.
So I think, and this is something that Kevin O'Connor wrote about on The Ringer today, that the foundations are like I think probably irreparably damaged. Like, this is not a situation that can necessarily be salvaged to a championship degree. Like, I firmly believe that, because like TJ Warren, amazing, great value add. TJ Warren's played how many games in the last 2 to 3 years?
0.
Like, since the bubble, he's essentially not played.
Well, he literally hasn't played.
He hasn't played. And the most concerning thing about the Warren injury last year was that he was like going to be ready to play, and then like in training camp they were like, no, actually his foot's not going to be ready to go, and it just kept getting pushed back and back and back. Like, that's never a good sign. And also Royce O'Neal is overrated at this stage in his career, so I'm not actually like doing backflips about that addition. So I wouldn't. I mean, we did our grades. Like, I wouldn't necessarily go through and give them like a super high grade, because I just am so certain that somehow, some way, this will fall apart at some point this season. And there's no guarantee that Durant doesn't just request a trade in the middle of the season. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, there was a follow-up report from, who was it? Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, that both the Nets and Durant were a little bit shocked at the lack of a trade market for, arguably the second best player in the world. And who's to say that market's going to get better? There
was a trade market. The Nets just decided that they didn't want any of the players available. They could have had DeAndre Ayton and however many first-round picks they wanted if they decided they wanted DA.
Or Jaylen Brown. And the final offer there was Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and 2 first-round picks from the Celtics. That was a concrete offer.
Which is a great offer.
Yeah.
That's a great offer. The DA offer with as many first-round picks as you want is a great offer.
I'd rather the Boston offer.
No, but I'm saying...
I know, there's offers on the table.
There's offers on the table. Yeah. So for them to be like, we're just really surprised that like more didn't get offered. It's like, well, actually a lot of good stuff got offered and you decided that it wasn't worth your time.
Yeah.
And fair enough, because it's Kevin fucking Durant. On a basketball level, they made the absolute right play in keeping him around. Basketball is so much more than so much more than on the court, though. It's so intangible. And on an intangibles level, your best player, who you've moved heaven and earth to keep and convince to move forward, 3 weeks ago was demanding that the whole front office gets fired, which led to the owner tweeting out saying we're not firing the front office. That's a completely unprecedented scenario in the recent NBA. Like, there's no analog for that. And then throw in the fact that the second best player on the team and the third best player on the team are not paragons of stability that can bring Kevin Durant back down to earth. You've potentially got the two most volatile players in the NBA over the last few years in Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons, and you're relying on them. And I can't think of a more terrifying sentence than I am relying on Kyrie Irving. Which is the fundamental reality of this team. Ben Simmons...
Far out, you got some words on this.
Ben Simmons is being cleared for 3-on-3 at the end of August. There's 2 months until the season starts. If Ben Simmons isn't on the court at the start of training camp, I am going to have an actual conniption. To summarize, Nets bad. Nets break soon.
Yeah, and those offers, and can I just correct myself? It was 1 first-round pick coming from Boston instead of 2. But those offers, if teams get desperate by the trade deadline, maybe the offers get better, and that's just the leverage play, because in the off season, everyone's got their best case scenario in their head. So obviously, you're not going to have your best offer.
And the other thing is that they limited themselves artificially, because they said we want to look for offers that will only help us to compete. If they had said we're open to anything, and a bad team came to them and made them an offer that knocked them away of picks and young players, they could have just done that and said, if we get enough value for this guy, we'll pivot into a tank. We'll pivot into building around young players. That Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley got bandied about, and there was discussions about would you, wouldn't you? But if some team came along and said, here, take this 21-year-old and 10 picks.
It's hard to tank though. 10 picks, ha ha ha. But it's hard to tank because Houston, just has their future by a nut grasp.
No, but the thing that you're getting in that is a premium blue chip player, which is what all the other teams are tanking for anyway. You already get, the other teams are tanking for Evan Mobley or Scotty Barnes. You get Evan Mobley or Scotty Barnes, as well as future cracks at
but what have you learned about the NBA? You don't just need one star.
No, but I'm not saying that they should have done that. I'm just saying that in terms of them saying, the market didn't eventuate. And it's you limited yourself to 12 teams that could even theoretically make you an offer. And then you decided you didn't want the best trades assets from all of those teams. Anyway.
Well, that's the news of the week, because we're not going to talk about the flurry of reports coming out of New York that... report in inverted commas. It's a very Stephen Bond.
The New York media market loves inverted comma reports. They actually thrive off of it.
Do you want to introduce our major topic for this episode?
We're going to talk about tanking. Because each year there's an unprecedented amount of teams that are just saying we are going to be bad. We have no intention of being good. We're going for the lottery balls. Even though that's harder to do, it's harder to get those lottery balls bouncing your way in recent years because of the flattened lottery odds. But I think a good place to start with this is just that there's so many teams employing different approaches to how they want to tank. We've got the heir to the process sixes in the OKC Thunder. You've got a team like San Antonio who has attempted and failed to stay relevant and is now just in complete teardown mode, shedding any assets that it can, bringing in young players and picks. You've got someone like the Detroit Pistons who are, trying to get those ping pong balls and loading up on premium talent, but also supplementing their roster with useful / semi-useful veterans.
We'll talk about that.
Well, we can talk about that. So I think that's a good place to start. What do you think overall, if you're building a tank from the ground up, what's your direction? How are you going to do this? If you want to, let's put a timeline on it and say, be good again within 3 to 4 years. What are you doing?
Is that ever the directive you see from these tanking teams, 3 to 4 years, or is it longer? What do you think?
Well, I mean, OKC, they've said as long as it takes.
Yeah.
But someone like Indiana, I've kind of termed what they're doing with their tank like an in and out tank. It almost reminds me more of like a something that you might see in the it's a retool, not a rebuild.
Yeah.
You might see it in the NFL, or Chelsea in the APL a few seasons ago did it. They had a transfer ban, so they just said, we're going to spend 1 year developing all of our young players and then we'll be back. Indiana historically has had no appetite for a tank, and I do not expect them to say as long as it takes, or even 3 years.
Yeah.
I think they're going in, they're going to try and get as high a draft pick as they can, and they're going to come out with Halliburton, their draft pick, Benedict Mathurin, who they picked this year, and whatever they get in return for their trades, and say like, okay, this is it.
Yeah. I just think, so the Pacers are in a little bit of a different situation, because like outside of the Thunder, no one else has a team as good as Tyrese Halliburton. Like Tyrese Halliburton, I wonder what his ceiling is, whether it's first team, second team, third team All-NBA, or just high-end All-Star.
Do you think that he's got NBA... All-NBA ceiling?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But then, like, that's not a building block, because you can't win a championship with 2 All-Stars. You need an All-NBA guy.
Yeah.
So, OKC have an All-NBA guy, in my opinion, in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And none of the other dudes have that guy yet. Like, obviously, Paolo Banchero, let's see him, like, actually put the ball in the hoop for the first time before we start anointing him that. And all those guys like that. But to answer your first question, what would I do? How would I go about it if I were a team that had to be good in a couple of years? I would do exactly what the Spurs are eventually going to do and what Houston Rockets have done. We've talked about this in the past, but I love Houston just saying, look, we've been in a situation where we've had these value trades sent to us. Value trade being here's the 16th pick and we'll get like XYZ guy. And they've gone out, and while they've drafted Jalen Green second, they've also drafted, who's that guy I really like? The European big. Şengün, yeah. So they've got guys like that. They've obviously made a value trade for Kevin Porter Jr. I really like that they got Tari Eason, this most recent draft, Jabari Smith. He's the third best guy, and they had the third pick. Just get a bunch of dudes in. Now, you don't really believe that they can all develop, but I think, like, worst case scenario, you can trade some of them for value if it's all looking good, right? But then again, they're not all going to look good, because not every draft pick is just going to come out and be good.
Yeah.
But something that I really would do, and I think something that we can learn from the process Sixers, is just get old men in the room. And I remember there was this article during like Giannis's rookie or second year season where the veteran on that team was Jared Dudley. And Jared Dudley, a dude who was still actually quite serviceable on the basketball court, and maybe they could have traded him for a second round pick. But Jared Dudley just said, I love being the old man, just like I love being the guy who's just coming in, telling these dudes how to live. Like, a lot of these dudes are teenagers, and just him just being like, hey, just sort of chill a little bit on spending money. Like, just life skills with just old dudes who just seem really lovable. And Jared Dudley's been on some amazing chemistry situations. Like, obviously won the title with the Lakers, was on that amazing Brooklyn team that were all best friends, and he had that really good thing with the Jason Kidd.
Steve Nash Suns.
Steve Nash Suns
the end
as
of
well.
The Suns run.
So I would do exactly what we're seeing the Houston Rockets do, and what we're hopefully going to see a couple of these other teams do, but just make sure you've got stable old dudes who are happy to be the veteran, who are happy just to like lead this group of young men. A little bit like what Robin Lopez was doing last year for the Magic, just less pronounced. And I've just got this one thought in my head that I always remember, which there was a Ringer article where they were talking about Jason Kidd. I think this might have been his rookie year as a coach, talking about Jason Kidd's coaching strategy and why it's working. Like, outside of just the basketball point of view, they interviewed a lot of players and said, like, why do you play so hard for him? They had some, like, they rated well on some, some hustle metrics or whatever. And Jared Dudley said, well, one thing that Jason Kidd does is, like, once a week, he's got this, like, NBA trivia thing where he just comes in and says, all right, who it'll be a question about, like, let's say the 90s Knicks or something, or a question about Hakeem Olajuwon or maybe Bill Russell, right? And a lot of the young dudes on the team were just like, not that they don't know who Hakeem Olajuwon was, but they just simply don't know what his fucking block rate was, or like if he got the 5x5 stat line. And Jared Dudley, who apparently just loves the NBA and loves just knowing about all those little details, was like, "Hey, come here, like I'll show you the answers." So they ended up like Jason Kidd would give them the sheet to go home and do some homework. They'd all just go over to Jared Dudley's house, have dinner. He'd fill out all their answers, say, "Oh, well, since you actually don't know, let's watch the YouTube clip of Hakeem Olajuwon getting 5 blocks and 5 steals in a game." Like just cool stuff like that. And I just think that is so valuable. And also we've seen it fail with Sam Hinkie, where Sam Hinkie was like, I have, at the time, 13 roster spots. I need all 13 roster spots to be working for me in terms of I need all of these roster spots to potentially be a superstar player. So I'm going to spend it on Jakar Sampson. I'm going to spend it on Henry Sims. Which one? Doesn't matter.
Jericho.
He's like, just because on the off chance this dude turns into the next LeBron James, which isn't correct because you're going to have dudes that are just never going to work anyway. So instead of taking a flyer on your bottom 3 picks, bring in a bunch of old dudes. Long-winded answer. What are your thoughts?
I think that you're bang on there with regards to you have to have old men in the room, but you have to have old men on the court as well. Because Jared Dudley, he's like him being there, the sage veteran head and like showing them how to be pros and how to like manage life a little bit better absolutely has value, but it doesn't have as much value as someone who can still play, who's doing that. Someone who's out there playing like 20 minutes a night, who can really like show how it's done, lead by example on the court rather than leading from the bench. That's where someone like Udonis Haslam's impact is limited because he hasn't played in 4 years. But I feel like you need to have veterans who are like a part of the team. And what that means is essentially you can't do what Hinkie did and say that roster spots 9 through 15 are going to be like boom or bust guys who I'm going to cycle out willy-nilly as I see fit. That you need to have older players with a role on the team.
Yeah, like the Hinkie Sixers for 2 years, they had Jason Richardson who didn't play at all. So, like, yeah, you could...
And that wasn't...
could be your argument.
That wasn't a situation
where you brought him in.
Where he's like, you're here as like a culture guy. That was a situation where Jason Richardson was like, I want to play. And Hinkie's like, no, like, you might be too good to play, so, like, we're not going to play you. We're going to play this other guy who is not NBA caliber because we want to lose games. And if it turns out he is NBA caliber, then we'll trade him for a pair of seconds. And then I'll use that to spin on and on. And I think... casting the eye back, Hinkie's approach worked from an asset standpoint because what they ended up with was Jahlil Okafor the 3rd pick, Embiid the 3rd pick, Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz the 1st picks.
He also drafted Nerlens Noel.
Yeah, but that's not only is it neither here nor there, it's nowhere. I don't think that.
What are you talking about?
I don't think that. Well, I mean, like, it's fucking Nerlens Noel.
Jahlil Okafor's fucking Jahlil Okafor.
Get to him when we talk about Detroit. No, I mean, I don't think that the 6th pick actually factors into...
All right, anyway, I've gotten off the thing. Keep going.
No, well, I'm just going to say, I don't think the 6th pick is enough of an asset that it factors into...
Something he gained.
But if you're not tanking for the 6th pick, the difference between the 6th and the 8th pick is negligible.
Okay.
You're tanking for a top 4 pick, realistically. And you got 4 of those. So that is essentially exactly what he was after. Now, bad mistake drafting Jahlil Okafor over Kristaps Porzingis, maybe. Bad mistake trading up to draft Markelle Fultz, obviously.
Wasn't a Hinkie decision.
I know.
I know.
For the team as a
as
a whole. The reason why they're not like a fucking perennial championship team right now with 4 top 3 picks on their roster is because they kind of fucked it up a little bit. But in terms of getting those picks, they did achieve exactly what Hinkie set out to achieve. But I do think that there's something to be said for like the opportunity cost of doing that. And that's why I'm kind of a bit nervous about the OKC approach to the tank because it is so reminiscent of the Sixers. And I think that they go further in some ways, which we've seen with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander the last 2 seasons and Josh Giddey last season, that they're shutting these guys down if they win too many games. And SGA in his first year with the club, he's playing alongside Schroeder and Chris Paul, and they're this 3-headed guard lineup that Billy Donovan is rolling out and they're on their way to win 48 games. SGA like learned from these veteran point guards and from being on a playoff team, and he's trying to take those skills and put them together for his own game, but also lead by example on the court. And they're actively reducing his opportunities to do that, which not only hurts him, but also, as I'm saying, it's important to have older players playing a role who know how to do it on the court. The young guys coming through would really benefit from playing with SGA, who's learned from the people above him. Like, obviously, he's still 23, 24, but to these young guys, he's a guy who's been a starter for whole seasons. He's a guy who's like, you know, like an all-star level player.
Like you think a lot about Trey Mann. Like his shots are just going to get a little bit better.
Exactly right, and he's going to know where to stand because, you know, in the timeout, like as they're walking from the timeout, SGA saying like, okay, like you go over here. Or when he does this, you do that. Like the guy sitting on the bench is great because when they're in the locker room or at quarter time, like he can just like say what he wants to, but you can't say those things on the court. You can't lead by example.
Well, to back your point up there, John Hollinger had a really good tidbit just after Golden State won the title, where he said to Nate Duncan on their podcast together that just they were talking about what to do with Andre Iguodala and whether to bring him back, and they were talking about the veteran leadership. And John Hollinger goes, well, you know, obviously he's worked in the Memphis front office, and he goes, like, there is obviously massive importance to having a guy on the roster, and like Udonis Haslem, just having him there just to be like telling guys what to do. And as soon as they become an assistant coach, like, you know, Sean Livingston's an assistant coach for Golden State, but he has much less of a draw than Andre Iguodala. So there's a massive drop off between having the 15th roster spot like Iggy right now and then being an assistant coach. But he goes, there is even a more bigger drop off for them having Zach Randolph start the game at the 4 and tell some young kid where to run, as opposed to having Zach Randolph being your 15th man like Andre Iguodala. So he goes, there's diminishing returns he has seen in his front office experience from a guy who's actually giving you the ball to a dude who's just bringing Wiggins over saying, don't do that, man, to, you know, Sean Livingston, the assistant coach. So that backs up what you're saying. Yeah,
I mean, like, it's different. If you're in the trenches with these guys and you're there and you've got this veteran support with you, it's different for, like you say, for them to be on the side of the court yelling and pointing and saying, do that, because you've got the coaches for that. And you kind of like, in the game, like, you're listening to your coaches, but you're also kind of like tuning them out because you know what's going on. Like, your coach being like, da-da-da-da-da. You're like, okay, like, bro, like, I'm out here, I played 35 minutes, I'm sweating bullets, I'm giving everything I've got. You're in a suit on the sideline yelling and pointing, like, okay. If someone else is out there sweating bullets with you, giving everything they've got, showing you how it's done, like, I think there's real value in that. And if you look at the age profile of the Oklahoma City Thunder, the only players who kind of have experience in the NBA is Derek Favors and Mike Muscala. The rest of them are all under 25.
Yeah.
Mike Muscala's NBA experience is like negligible, realistically.
Yeah.
Derek Favors is someone who has heaps of experience on being on really good teams, been on bad teams. He started his career on the Utah Jazz. He started his career on the Nets and was traded to the Jazz in his second season and was like bad for a few years. Like, he's got the experience. It looks like he's going to be traded. He's not someone who's
all bought out. Yeah.
He's not someone who's in here for like the value that he brings. He's someone who's there to bring in other sorts of value. Like, he's going to be, you know, out. And I think that there are diminishing returns when you get 5 21-year-olds on the court, because what you're hoping for is that you turn into the 2009 Thunder.
Yeah.
And you end up with like 3 All-NBA players and like a fucking all-star level player on your roster. And
I'll tell you what I think we need to do when we talk about tanking and when we talk about teams accumulating assets. I think we need to completely remove the OKC Thunder from the discussion in terms of like that Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, because to draft 3 MVPs will never be done again.
No, never.
And I think by people talking about tanking, they say, oh, but what if you draft Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook and James Harden? Like, that is such an outlier. Look at the second best situation, and there's literally nothing that comes to our heads as what maybe the process Sixers, right?
Well, I was thinking Boston.
Yeah, okay, but that's like,
which is way, way, way worse.
And they obviously had the Brooklyn thing as well. So it's like, there is that'll never happen again. So pretty much, if you're out there, if there's any GMs listening to us, get that out of your head. If there's any owners,
but don't you think that Sam Presti's trying to do that again? And Sam Presti's banking on that happening again?
Yeah. which is the discussion we're having, Dante.
Yeah.
But I will go back to the Houston Rockets.
Tell Sam Hinkie to listen to the pod, because if he hears what you just said, maybe he'll think twice.
Yeah, going back to the Houston Rockets, they obviously had. By the way, I don't love the Houston Rockets rebuild. Like, I question some of their decisions, but
you know who their owner is, don't you?
Yeah, that as well. What's his name? Dirty Fingers.
Dirty Fingers for Tita.
But I do like some of the moves they've done recently. Now, they had the terrible chemistry situation last year where they were going to fire the coach of a fucking tanking team 20 games into the year.
They did also lose, 25 games in a row.
Christian, as Caitlin Cooper put it on her most recent podcast with Nate Duncan, doing it for talking about the Indiana Pacers, she says Christian Wood displayed the worst defensive big man game I have ever watched in her entire life.
And he's going to save the Mavericks.
But obviously, major chemistry issues last season for the Houston Rockets. But they've got a guy in Eric Gordon who can play a role in the NBA. So he's one of the guys who could be out there in the trenches. But when they made that trade to get out of... who's the guy I just mentioned? Christian Wood. They got back in return... Marquise Chris, Boban Marjanovic, and Trey. Did they get? Who's that guy who used to play for Trey Burke? No, they didn't. Yes, they did. And they said they actually really want to keep those guys because they really understand the value of having a veteran in there. When I heard that, I was like, my brain went through the whole entire trivia Jared Dudley thing. So I'm like, that's awesome. They're doing the right thing. Now, they've got fucking 20 roster spots filled up on a 15-man roster, excluding two-ways, right? So they need to make some decisions and need to make them fast. But, at least they're doing the right thing where it's like, okay, we've got all these high to mid first-round picks and even late first-round picks. We've got some old men like Boban Marjanovic. We've got someone like Eric Gordon who can be out there. And they actually learned, there was an article on The Athletic where they said, hang on, having Dennis Schroeder for the second half of the season after he got traded from Boston, having Dennis Schroeder there just to actually play games and just say to Jalen Green, you got to cut when a point guard like me does that. Then it was just an article talking about how valuable that is. That's awesome, and they're doing the right thing.
And that's I lived this experience as a Suns fan watching the late teens Suns, where we had Josh Jackson, Marcus Chris, Dragon Bender all drafted in the top 8, and they're supposed to be the building blocks of our team going forward. And our point guards were no one. It was cycling through the absolute worst of the worst. It was Tyler Ulis and Elia Kobo and no one good. Javon Carter coming from Memphis at the end of that run.
Yeah.
And those players were not good, as has been borne out by their experience in Phoenix and their NBA careers going onwards. None of them have found any success, or any lasting success. Josh Jackson's kind of proven he can maybe be a rotation player. Those players would have benefited from having an actual point guard play. You can't... I just don't think you can overstate the benefit of having that person who can tell you what to do and point where to go, but also just, keep things ticking over, keep things running in a healthy ecosystem, because you don't want Jalen Green to average 25 points and shoot 39% from the field. That's actually worthless.
Yeah.
If Jalen Green is getting into the habit of taking awful shots, habits that's going to be really hard for him to break when the team is good, you don't want that. So the best way for him to get in the habit of taking good shots is to get him good shots. And the best way to get him good shots is to have people who actually know how to play basketball.
Well, to answer your question from before, if I was in charge of a team, I would just get a veteran point guard like Goran Dragic and just start him 20 minutes a game. And just this chat right now has made me remember right after Sammy he got fired, who was the guy who came in with the big collars? Colangelo came in, and the first move he did was sign Ish Smith off the waiver wire, and Ish Smith was a savior for the Sixers. He came in, he hit a game winner, and then helped them win 2 games out of 3, and then everyone was just like, oh my god, a veteran point guard. Just get a veteran point guard, sign Goran Dragic, just have Goran Dragic to be there for someone like Jalen Green or all your young guards.
And again, to go back to the Dudley point, obviously Jared Dudley brings a lot of value and wealth of experience, and he can lend his perspective really well. But someone like Eric Gordon, without being able to speak on Eric Gordon's personal characteristics, of which I know very little, Eric Gordon plays the same position as Jalen Green. Eric Gordon has made tons of money and at various points has been the highest paid player on his team or in the top 2 or 3 highest earners. He's been a 24-year-old earning $20 million a year and walking around like he fucking owns the city, which is something that Jared Dudley has never really experienced.
Yeah.
Like someone like KG being on the Timberwolves when Kat was really young. He's someone who plays the same position. He's been at the top of the league. He can tell you what it's like to be the best player on a team. Jared Dudley can tell the 8th best player on the team what it's like to be in his position. But I don't necessarily know if he could speak to like the stars. But like having good, relevant veterans in there who can, like I keep saying, like play a role on the court, I think is really valuable.
But in saying that, I do think there's a line. I think there's a line which...
For sure, because you don't want Eric Gordon out there playing alongside Jalen Green and Jalen Green really benefiting and you're harming KPJ because you're not getting him enough minutes. You don't want that.
Not even that, because just to have the veteran, you need to have a human being there. I don't think having 3 guards is going to like completely clog up your rotation. They've obviously got thank you Washington, who can be a really good point guard in my eyes. But I'm more talking about the Detroit Pistons, which I alluded to before. That, all right, they've got some veterans in there who can help, teach these guys what to do. They've got Kelly Olynyk. They, in a salary dump trade, they got Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks. Kemba Walker got waived, Did he end up getting...
No, I think he's still on the team. But he'll probably be waived.
Yeah. Also, when you play 2K My League on the modded rosters that I use for 2023, Kemba sits on the waiver wire, like as he probably will. But you can't sign him for less than $20 million. And he's rated 79
That's why
overall.
2K is the worst.
Yeah, imagine pre-ordering it.
Bro,
keep going.
I was going to say, you should jump on Football Manager.
Yeah, I showed you.
Some guy made his own country. He made a mod where he can make his own country, and he created a league in this imaginary country, and he put it into the world, and he's managing in this country.
That's funny. And Detroit also have Corey Joseph, but I think at some point, you might have guys that are going to play and be in the trenches with them, but you need to develop Marvin Bagley and Jalen Duren. And he's now fighting for more Jalen Duren than Marvin Bagley, but he's now fighting for minutes with Nerlens Noel and Kelly Olynyk. And you could say, maybe one of them get traded, but what are you doing? You've got these guys under contract for a year after this next one.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a fight. There's nothing that Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks throw him in there as well. There's nothing that they can do in this. Let's say that it's likely that they're traded around the trade deadline. That's I think realistic. There's nothing they can do between now and February in the next 6 months that will drastically increase their value. If you traded Alec Burks at the trade deadline, you're probably getting a first round pick. Maybe you're getting one for Nerlens Noel. Maybe you're not. Because Alec Burks has done everything in his career that's showing the other playoff teams this is what you can give. People know what they're getting from Nerlens Noel. So I think you can play them 20 minutes a game. And it's not a battle for Jalen Duren to get minutes. And if he shows in his 24 minutes a game that he's ready for 30, you don't have to keep playing the veteran, because you can say, look, this is what's happening. You need to continue to do this, and we'll work out a trade for you at a time that's feasible.
Well,
and that still gives
a little bit
value.
like how LaMelo Ball came in, because remember, he wasn't starting when he was a rookie. He was behind Terry Rozier and someone else, and then they eventually elevated.
Would it have been Terry Rozier and Devontae?
Yeah. Far out. That sucks.
Yeah, Devontae. We actually, I can't remember what you were saying, but I remember saying this is an aberration, this is a blip. Even when people were like, he should be an all-star.
I never said all-star, but I was like, he's very efficient on a hard shot, which was off the dribble threes.
Yeah, he's very efficient on that specific shot. But
how often
do
you see an aberration from the hardest part of the court?
What number? You can guess what number it starts with, but what do you think it is?
What number is the field goal percentage starts with?
It's a
3. It's a 3.
No, it's obviously a 3.
Rip the wound off.
It's obviously a 3, but that's...
So with the Pelicans last year?
That season, the 2019-20 season, his inverted commas all-star season, where he averaged 18 points and 7.5 assists.
So I wrote an article at the time about what he was doing, and I know he shot better from 3 than he did the field.
No, you're actually wrong.
That would be that would statistically be incorrect. What a dumb comment to say.
You're almost right, but you're not.
It was like 39-40.
Nah, it's actually worse. It's 38 from the field and 37 from 3. His career high is 38 from the field, and his career from the field is 36 with a 37 with 36 with a 35 from 3.
He's only small, but
yeah, man. There's big guys who can miss a lot of shots. They exist.
The Pelicans.
So why do we need to get small guys who can miss a lot of shots?
The Pelicans let Lonzo walk to sign a point guard in free agency that they hoped was Chris Paul or Kyle Lowry.
If the Pelicans end up being good, it will be a tragedy that all of the terrible things that David Griffin did over that 18-month period go unnoticed. One thing that I want to talk about that pertains to this discussion, which I think is an issue for teams like Houston and like an Oklahoma City, who are just saying OKC, we know what they're doing. Houston over the last 2 drafts has brought in 6 first-round picks. So over 1/3 of their roster are first-round picks with 1 or less years of NBA experience.
Yeah.
So that's quite a substantial representation of young players. Obviously, what you're hoping for is that a few of those young players develop into bona fide stars, max them, and there you go. You've got a great young team that you can, not saying that it's directly comparable because we're banning this, but a la Oklahoma City Thunder, a great young team that you can build with, grow with, tinker around the edges, but you've got really the foundations and the core in place. And one problem with that is if those players end up becoming all-star, all-NBA level players, you max them, fine, no problems. If you end up drafting at the top of the draft and you take a player like RJ Barrett, Rowan, as we like to call him, who went 3rd a few years ago, that's someone who has not really distinguished himself and definitively proven that he even can be a one-time all-star after 3 seasons, but would still probably command a max if he hits the open market. Someone will max him without the guarantee that he'll ever even be an all-star in the Eastern Conference, which, if you're asking me, I'm saying no. I'm saying that won't happen. I'm saying that he couldn't be the 3rd best player on a championship team.
Yeah.
But if you get yourself into that situation where you've invested a high pick in someone who's proven to be good but not great, you are then going to be financially obligated to pay. And what happens with those contracts is not that you can move them for value later, because you can't. You end up being like the Timberwolves with Wiggins, where you attach a first-round pick just to get another average contract back in. And that can really fuck up your rebuild.
Well, I mean, that's the worst case scenario, like paying Wiggins to be a superstar when he's a lower end all-star, right?
But you can't if you can't get out of a max contract with ease if they're bad.
Yeah, but
especially if they're bad, young and locked up for multiple years. That's aside from a Westbrook level contract, that's the least tradable contract.
Yeah, but what if? What if you just talk about the middle outcome where you've drafted Miles Turner? He's not a superstar, but he's a good player. You get him on, what is he, 11 mil a year?
Miles Turner, I think, is on 17.
Yeah. I mean, that's, worst case scenario, it's still tradable because there's not too much money in the grand scheme of things.
The difference with that, though, is if you said to RJ Barrett, we'll give you a 4-year, $70 million deal, he's walking out of the brim. Miles Turner has proven to be a good defensive center and a high-level starter. He also was drafted 11th, which is outside that realm where you expect.
Draft pedigree hangs around for so long, doesn't it?
Draft pedigree also, I think, intangibly hangs around with how the player perceives themselves.
Yeah.
RJ Barrett is saying, I was in contention to be the number 1 pick. I've been the second best player on this team for 3 years now. Reward me.
Yeah. You
need to show me some recompense for all that I've done for you. And teams listen to that because that's a pretty compelling argument. But if you have one player like that, let's say in a few years time, Giddey is like that in OKC, you've already got Shea on a max, but whether Shea can be that player that's transcendent and the best player on a Final Four
an
all-NBA player. Whether he's going to be a guy that's dragging you through playoff rounds is entirely up for debate. And if Giddey ends up being one of these Barrett type players where they command max money, but they're realistically only worth like in the mid-20s, all of a sudden your calculations get a little bit more difficult, and it becomes a little bit easier to see how instead of unlocking this like this plethora of options, and you've got all this youth and flexibility moving forward, you're actually kind of locked in on long expensive contracts.
Well, it's a little bit like my mate Şengün, right? Obviously can't be too good friends with him because I've stuffed up his name twice, but
you just call him Alpi.
Alpi. Like, if his best case scenario might be Nikola Vucevic, right?
Okay, yeah.
Like, that could just be who he is. And he gets to free agency and he goes, well, I just averaged 20 points and 10 rebounds with 4 cheeky assists and 2 steals. Just give me all the money in the world. And they go, okay, those are actually great counting stats, and you could be Nikola Jokic, but he could just be capped at Nikola Vucevic for the rest of his years. And then we're going to be in a situation like you just talked about, where it's like, okay, that you can't trade that pick at all. You can't trade that player. Let's just take a little bit of a break.
The depth, the deep two. God, that's a mouthful. Anyways, I'm Marco, co-host of the Hey, Daniel Gafford, what's the name of our podcast?
The JVG NBA Tribute Show.
Wow, I can't believe it's that easy. Thanks, Gaff. You probably know us as 2 members of the 4-Man Weave plus Marco, but we know you as our next listener.
Well said, Lucas. I gotta ask, how do we differ from the pack of basketball podcasts?
It's a great question, Marco. You see, on our basketball podcast, we have 2 male co-hosts.
Wow, truly groundbreaking. After this episode, stay on your favourite podcasting app and give us a spin.
And we're back. So you could be stuck in a situation like that.
You see teams pay that though.
But what do you want to do? What's your alternative?
Well, the alternative is to
stop drafting dudes.
No, but the alternative, I guess, is to like not cast such a wide net. Again, I keep coming back to OKC, but Houston falls into this as well.
But more bites at the apple.
More bites at the apple, but also more chances to lock yourself in, because if you feel like you've invested in this player and it comes down to, are we maybe going to overpay for him, or are we going to lose not only the investment on the draft pick, but also on the 4 years that we put into this player? Or if they're actually good the 3 years, because you're extension eligible after 3. And how many times has an extension eligible player signed a contract that 1 year later was like, phew.
Well, maybe we're going to see Sam Hinkie do something different here, because we saw at the start of the offseason. Sam Presti. Presti was just like, you know what, Isaiah Roby isn't it. And just let him go. It's
very different
for a minimum guy.
For a minimum guy versus someone who you have considered or hoped to be foundational. And so I think whilst the avenue isn't to stop drafting, the avenue isn't to just shy away from taking first round picks and building them into your future plans, it is a pitfall that comes with this wide net mode, because people think of the process Sixers, they think of like bringing in undrafted guys and hoping that they become stars, or bringing in a second round pick and hoping you can find value from that. But what it actually is, if you do it well, is concentrated on high value prospects. And I don't mean prospects as in individuals, I mean like a high value opportunity with this player. And if that even looks like it could be realistic, you're going to pay for it. And even 28, 29 of the 30 teams will pay for it. It's why like the decision to extend De'Aaron Fox was lauded.
So fast, yeah.
Everyone was like, yeah, of course this guy just did this in his 3rd year, of course you're extending him. The Wiggins decision was like, yeah, like he's going to get better than this. He's going to continue to improve. Like this decision gets made all the time. And when it doesn't work, which does happen frequently, that player is then really hard to move, because De'Aaron Fox is like not necessarily a movable contract for what you would consider value. Unless he proves that he is the player that he looked like he was 2 seasons ago, he's just going to be earning close to $40 million for the next 3 years, like on your dime. Mini again had to attach the pick that ended up being 8th overall to get off Wiggins and bring in Russell. Obviously, that's a singularly disastrous trade because not only did they attach the pick, but they got the worst player in return. But it is I think an unavoidable pitfall when you're trying to get 2, 3, 4 guys in who are like high pedigree draft picks. That if even one of them doesn't hit in the way you want, but doesn't fail enough to be discardable, like the Sixers did with Jahlil Okafor, they said, you're not actually going to cut it, we're just going to get rid of you and trade you away for nothing. If you're in that middle ground, you can very easily get like locked in into a Vucevic type contract, which unless you have a plucky Chicago team looking to come along and overpay for a contract like that, can be difficult to move. And if you keep them around, like you're just paying big money for like an average player.
How do you want to wrap this up? Because we've said a lot of things.
We have. This has very much been like a throw at the wall seg.
I don't know. I mean, obviously the answer isn't to stop drafting, but also at some point it just comes down to the egos of these lead decision makers, where it's like if you do draft De'Aaron Fox and obviously there's been heaps of dudes making decisions around De'Aaron Fox. Get the freak down, bro. Fuck off. I'm not speaking to Dante.
He typed on my keyboard 45.
What do they mean, Mason? It just comes down to the individual egos of the dudes making the decisions, where if you draft a guy, like if you draft Killian Hayes and it goes bad, it's like, oh crap, we stuffed up. But if you draft De'Aaron Fox isn't the best point guard in the world, but you're going to pay him like it because you're like, man, we got potential, I can sell it to my bosses, I can sell it to my fan base. So we're just going to keep having these decisions, and whether it's luck or skill, we're just going to have to hope that the team we're rooting for, or the team that's, we want to see them do well, we just have to hope that they get the right decision, they draft the right guy. Like OKC, we have to hope that they know what they're doing, because like Josh Giddey's second contract might not be very good. Like it might not be a very attractive contract if he continues to be like a triple double machine and stuff. What if he gets paid more than the fifth wheel in a championship?
If you're a near max player, you get maxed.
Yeah.
That's just the way that the NBA works, and unfortunately, like if you're paying someone who's worth, these numbers are going to sound crazy, but this is what it's going to look like very shortly for max contracts. But if you're a $30 million player and you're getting paid 37, 39, 41, 44, like all of a sudden by halfway through the contract your value is completely warped. That I think could be a real problem. I think in terms of wrapping up, why don't we come back to kind of how we started, and I'll just ask you who out of the teams that are like currently looking to do this you're most optimistic about. Not necessarily like who's going to win a championship first, but like who's going to succeed with their plan.
Yeah. I got to say Detroit, just being able to draft in the top 3 and then being able to draft in the top 10, like that's just so sexy to be able to like get Cade and then the next year get Jaden Ivey and Jalen Durant. Like it's a 2K rebuild. It's amazing. What do you reckon?
I want to say Detroit as well. Because I'm really bought in on Cade as like a potential All NBA kind of like tide that lifts all boats type operator. And if Jaden Ivey hits, well, like there you go, like that's your offense unto itself.
Yeah.
And I think that despite the fact that guys like Burks and Noel might be sent out in trade to bring in more assets, I think the signing of a guy like Kelly Olynyk.
I'm just to say I'm not worried about like Burks and Noel. Like I don't actually think they're going to stop his development.
No, but what I'm saying is that I think that there's a commitment to bring the right types of veterans in and to kind of like leverage their experience. So I think the young guys will be in a positive learning environment, which is part of the reason why I'm very bullish on Detroit being good within a few years.
Yeah. I had a bit of a tirade to go on about Chris Duarte being a trade chip and like sort of why the fuck would you draft the 24-year-old with your 13th pick. But we can save that for another time / never talk about it because it's not actually that interesting.
As a Cam Johnson stan, I love talking about why would you draft 24-year-olds.
I mean,
so I'm always down for it. You've got my number. We can connect. We can connect offline if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, no. All right, Dante, I'll speak to you next week. Peace. We were over the moon when we first heard that the NBA was going to be televised on Australian free-to-air TV in the 2019-20 season. It didn't exactly go swimmingly, with the nasty cough halting the season and games getting cancelled left, right, and centre, but it was a huge step and an exciting one for basketball fans all across the country.
Better yet, it wasn't a commercial channel cashing in on some basketball nerds like us. It was SBS, one of our public broadcasters. Unfortunately, the NBA wasn't the only thing SBS was pushing last season. They also ran advertisements from Sportsbet, Ladbrokes, Bet365, BetEasy, and Neds, some of the biggest sports betting companies in Australia.
In a one step forwards, two steps backwards move, SBS has dropped the ball here. As a public broadcaster, SBS plays a key role in providing relevant, culturally appropriate health information to local communities. The last thing SBS should be doing is offering a platform for gambling companies during the most financially unstable time in recent memory.
This past year, men aged 18 to 24 made up 79% of new gambling account holders, with increased median spending and frequency of bets. This is the last thing we should be spending our money on, given the financial uncertainty that comes with the pandemic. During COVID lockdowns, wagering companies spent more money on advertising and incentives to gamble, and it worked. SBS needs to hear from viewers that gambling ad revenue isn't worth the harm it causes. Call on the SBS chair, George Savitas, to put community health ahead of gambling revenue by signing the petition at www.endgamblingads.org.au/get gambling off SBS with hyphens in between.